Hi, all. Welcome in. I see a couple of you. We're just going to give it a few minutes for everyone to join and for us to get set up. While we give it a few minutes, would love to hear where you guys are calling in from. I'm in the Boston area, so if anyone is an East Coaster as well, please put it in the chat. Introduce yourself and where you're calling in from. So my name is Yusra. I'm calling in from Boston, Mass. Alrighty. Can you guys confirm you're able to? Yes, okay. The chat feature is working. Okay, awesome. Hi, Stephen. Hi, Sidish. Thanks all for joining. We're just waiting on John. Happy Wednesday to all. It is Wednesday, right? Yeah. Hoping it's been a pleasant week for all of you guys. Not too busy. Okay. Aruna, I think John is in the let's see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
I just moved him actually. So
Okay.
just waiting on our PMM John, whose computer. Okay, awesome. He's here. Alrighty. John, all good to share screen?
Yes, just trying to get it going here. Sorry for the delay.
No worries.
Is it coming through now?
It's
Yeah.
loading. Perfect. I see it.
Great.
Alrighty. Thanks everyone for giving us a couple minutes. Thanks so much for joining today. Hope you're having a great week so far. Please feel free to use the chat feature. Loved hearing where you guys are calling in from. Welcome to Opsera's Copilot Cursor Claude Code, what 250K developers revealed. Our product leaders will be giving you a live exec briefing on our 2026 AI Coding Impact Benchmark Report built on real data from 250,000 developers across 60 plus enterprises, 7 plus industries, and we'll be doing spotlight sections as well for your industry to make it as relevant to your organization as possible. A quick bit of housekeeping to start. Today's session is being recorded, and we'll share the recording with all registrants after the event. We'll also have a few interactive moments throughout the webinar, including live polls, so please jump in and participate. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, I'm excited to introduce John Jarbo, Product Marketing Manager, and Aruna Pattabiraman, Senior Principal Data Architect, who will set the stage for today's discussion. Over to you both.
Great. Thanks, Yuthra. Excuse me. Yeah, I guess to get started, I'll just introduce myself a little bit. I started as a developer. I've been in the industry for quite a while now in a variety of different roles, worked with probably hundreds, maybe even thousands of customers over the years. And yeah, have always basically focused on the developer and developer tools ecosystems. So I hopefully will have some things to say here. I'm excited to talk about kind of what the findings were in the report. And as Yusra mentioned, I'm joined by my colleague Aruna. and we'll be kind of walking you through the slides here. Before I get into the findings, let me just talk a little bit about, kind of where they came from, right? First off, I just want to emphasize this is a robust data set, right? We have actual behavioral data. Th- these are things that have happened in the real world. It's not, surveys or talking about sentiments or predictions or any of that. Um, we involved more than 250,000 developers over the course of basically the whole 2025. And we have verified data from over 60 enterprise organizations across 6 industries. We kind of started with data from our own platform, obviously, and we also incorporated data from many of the leading AI coding tools, as listed on the slide there. The goal was to correlate not just, kind of what was happening within those AI tools, but to correlate that with the outcomes that came from using those tools. Um, Basically across the entire life cycle. So not just what's happening by the developers in the AI coding tools, but also how that affected delivery, how that affected, the pipelines that deliver the code, and ultimately what the delivery metrics look like on the other end of that. So there's a lot of interesting data in the report, and basically it all boils down to about 5 stories. Those stories talk about kind of where the AI is helping, where it's causing problems, and what we can do about it. And then we'll also talk a little bit about which tools and approaches are driving the greatest impact, because obviously the choice of tools is going to have a big impact, not only on the outcomes that you see from those tools, but also on what you need to do in order to govern those tools. There's a big impact on the organizational side as well. We'll dig into each one of these questions in the upcoming slides, and we'll also include some concrete recommendations. And when all is said and done, I hope you'll take these questions, this discussion kind of back to your colleagues, your leaders, your board, and kind of find ways to leverage AI while improving the security and, delivering more value to your organizations. Um, Underlying all of the stories that we're going to talk about is a fundamental problem. And that's basically that AI is driving huge improvements in the inner loop of writing code. Um, and almost everybody is seeing big improvements there, right? We have time to PR typically being cut in half. Many folks are talking about creating 10 times as much code with AI. Um, and ultimately, what used to take them days to create is happening in hours or even minutes. And what used to cost thousands of dollars can be done in a fraction of that. And that's great. But the problem is that the outer loop, where the testing, the scanning, the delivery is happening, is still operating at human speed, right? There are manual gates, manual remediation cycles, and these manual processes weren't built to accommodate the scale of code created by AI. Our research uncovered that AI-generated PRs are waiting 4.6 times longer to be reviewed. Um, and that means that you're probably already seeing back pressure in your delivery processes. Um, Yusra, do you want to do a quick survey to see where folks are at? Cool.
Thanks all who voted. Yeah, these are the results from poll number one.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's actually somewhat surprising, but not too surprising, right? I mean, we already know that there's very broad adoption of AI tools, especially in development. and the poll, shows that with 50% of users showing that. We have some folks that are still exploring kind of how to integrate that into their process. And there are also some folks that are kind of treating it organically, right? Letting the developers kind of explore and choose the tools that are going to work for them, and then probably going to take that next step once they see which tools are actually going to help the developers. So okay, so yeah, that's all interesting. One thing that's important to note about the research that we've done and the concerns that we're going to be raising as we go through these slides is that these aren't theoretical concerns, right? I mean, we're already seeing evidence in the industry with some of the most advanced, most mature software companies being bitten by these hidden risks that are created by AI adoption. Amazon had to halt production and go into a company-wide retrospective to figure out eventually that poorly validated AI generated code was what was impacting their their uptime in their site. Microsoft found that AI is delivering code so quickly into production that human monitoring couldn't even prevent it from being deployed. By the time humans were alerted to the fact that a deployment was happening, it had already completed across the entire enterprise. AWS actually required 13 hours to undo a simple update that an overly aggressive agent had processed as a complete rip and replace of the existing environment. And the point of bringing this up is that if these companies, the most mature, most advanced companies out there, are struggling to manage the impact of AI, then we all need to pay attention. And with that, I will pass things over to Aruna to talk about the first story.
Yep. Thanks, John. Thanks for that introduction and getting started into the abstract of the webinar. So let me get into the data a bit, right? So looking at it from different ends. Our first story here, we've got like a couple of perspectives that we see on the data. So our first story here starts with something that felt counterintuitive when we first saw it. Nearly every enterprise we looked at had already adopted AI coding tools. The tools are everywhere, but yet the outcomes were all over the place, and the gap between adoption and results is what the story is actually about. So when almost everyone had the same tools, the tool itself stops being your advantage. Where we are at a point in the market where AI coding assistants are essentially table stakes, and the conversation has shifted from should we adopt to why aren't we seeing the results that we expected. And here's what is making that interesting, right? So across all the organizations we've studied so far, adoption is sitting at 91%. But look at what's underneath that number. Startups are pushing 97% adoption and accepting nearly half of everything what AI suggests. Healthcare is at 87, but only keeping about like one third of AI generated code. Same tool category, completely different behavior, and that gap in the acceptance rate is actually telling you something important about trust, governance, and risk culture within those organizations. Because here's the thing, right? Acceptance rate is a two-sided risk. If your teams are barely keeping any AI suggestions, that's probably a signal that developers don't trust the output. Or the tool hasn't been properly integrated into your actually how they work. But if the acceptance is too high, and it probably means that if teams are like rubber stamping everything, that's a governance problem waiting to become a production incident. Banking and insurance, that is why they sit in that cautious 31 to 36% range for a reason. Compliance pressure that technically shapes the behavior of how the adoption is shaping towards, right? Startups sit at a higher risk because their risk tolerance is completely different when you compare startups to other enterprise and other organizations. So the team winning the AI right now aren't the ones who adopted it first. They are the ones who paid attention to signals like these, who asked why is their acceptance rate looking like the way it did, and what is it said about how their teams are actually working, right? So adoption is always the easy part. So it is the challenge comes in is exactly where, like, how are you governing it, right? So how are you governing it, and how are the teams using it? How are you placing all the policies and controlling it? So that is what matters most across all the enterprise and organizations. So I'm going to move on to talk about a different real-time story, the one that tends to land hardest in the room, I would say, because most leaders have already heard the speed numbers, and they're real. Developers are writing code faster, but faster writing doesn't mean faster shipping, right? As John mentioned earlier. So they write code faster, but they don't. It gets stuck somewhere in the deployments, right? And that gap is costing teams more than they realize. So let me elaborate on this a bit more. So what we found is that AI accelerated one part of the pipeline and exposed the bottleneck everywhere else. And this slide tells that story really cleanly. If you look at the pipeline across the top, ticket, PR, review, you have merge, validate, and deploy. AI made a meaningful dent in exactly one stage. Everything stayed after that, it stayed exactly the same. The code is arriving nearly twice as fast as the review stage, but in the queue wait before a reviewer even picks it up has grown almost 4.4 and a half times longer. So you've got developers feeling productive, managers are seeing PRs close faster, and leadership thinking that AI investment is paying off. While the actual throughput at the end of the pipeline is net zero because nothing extra is getting shipped. The speed just moved the bottleneck; it didn't actually remove it. If you see. So think about what that means for your reviewers specifically, right? They were already stretched before AI came in. Now they are looking at significantly more PRs under more pressure with less time to review a PR. And that's not just a capacity problem, that's a quality risk as well. So when they feel the pressure, they start rushing into things, and rushed reviews misses things, and that's when the code being reviewed was generated by AI. The things that get missed tends to be little like logic level issues that doesn't look wrong on the surface, but ends up being quite costing you expensive as a production, coming back as a production incident. So yeah, let's do a quick poll time right now. So let us know, where does your AI generated code actually slows you down. So as we see here, is it like during the PR process, the review process, or is it any other part of the development life cycle?
And these are the results from poll number 2. Thanks all that took the time to vote.
Right. So most of them are like on the second half of the pipeline, whereas the first half seems like to be faster than expected. So most of them, I see that facing the same problem that we are just talking about right now. Okay. So yeah, moving on to I have another perspective as well to talk about today here. So the third area that I'm going to touch upon is one I'd argue the most important for anyone in the leadership or governance role, because on the surface, quality looks like it's improving, and in some ways it is, but underneath that, something else is happening, and the metrics most teams track won't show that to you. Let me get a bit deeper into this, right, so that you will understand what I'm talking about. AI is very good at writing code, as we all know, right? That looks great. And it passes the test. It writes tests by itself, and it also has the capability to pass the tests as well. But the problem is that secure code and testable code aren't the same thing. And this slide is where that gap becomes really visible, because depending on which metric you look at, you will walk away with a completely different story about how AI is performing. The green metrics look great. Test pass rate is up, bug escape rate is down. If those are just the numbers on your leadership dashboard, AI looks like an unqualified win. and that's the champion, right? And that's exactly the danger. That's what I'm trying to tell you about. Because sitting right next to those improving metrics are the two others that are moving in the wrong direction. Code duplication is up to 30%, and vulnerability density is up 18% almost. And those aren't rounding errors, that's a meaningful and consistent shift in the risk profile of your code base. The reason this happens is worth understanding because AI doesn't write code the way a senior engineer thinks, right? Or the persona who the developer level at which the developer is at. It doesn't think in that way and write. With a mental model of the whole system and awareness of past incidents and an instinct a senior developer or senior engineer has, an instinct of for where things go wrong under pressure. So all that knowledge AI is not aware or is not putting that into context before it's suggesting or starting to write code. It generates the code that is locally correct. It solves the problem. Yes, for whatever problem that you ask, it does solve it in front of it. It passes the test that has been written for it. But it can introduce patterns that are subtly fragile, that duplicate logic across the code base in ways that are hard to maintain, or that create vulnerabilities in edge cases that no test has ever anticipated. And because of this, which is happening at scale, across every ticket, every sprint, every team, the surface area for the risk is growing faster than most organizations even realize. The metrics that look fine are masking the ones that aren't. And if you are only reviewing the dashboard that shows green, you're making decisions based on an incomplete picture, is what I would say. So always when you're trying to measure an AI, if those for those who haven't started measuring where AI is taking them through, I would suggest to look not just at the first half of the pipeline, as we saw earlier, but definitely to continue to see the end-to-end picture across quality, across security, across the entire development life cycle to see how it has been progressing. So every life cycle, every stage of the life cycle definitely needs some sort of a progress being measured when you have to measure AI. So, and with that, I would pass it on to John. John, what do you think about like the scenarios that we've talked about so far? Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you covered a lot of that, right? And the really the kind of bottom line story in my mind is that there's the metrics that most teams are currently tracking are going to look good based on what AI is delivering. And if they're not looking at some of those more subtle markers like code duplication, which is, an indication of maintenance risk, um, vulnerability density, which a lot of teams can identify vulnerabilities when they do the scan, but the problem is AI is driving so much volume through the pipelines that sometimes the scans are getting skipped. Sometimes there just isn't as much time to review all of the results, and there's going to be more results because there's more code and because there's a higher density of vulnerabilities within the code that's being delivered. And so it's a lot more likely that some of those are going to slip through into production.
Right.
Another thing that the report found was that the types of vulnerabilities that are introduced by AI are more subtle, right? They're harder to find, and just as a result of that, they're also more likely to slip into production, and they're going to
Mm,
be a lot more expensive to address at that point. And they also introduce a lot more risk, obviously.
right. Yeah, just to add to that point, right? So the consistency is actually the most important part of this findings, right? So it means that it isn't a cultural problem or a maturity problem specific to certain types of organizations. It's actually a structural issue with how AI generated code interacts with the review processes that were never designed for this volume. So more code, same number of reviewers, and flaws that are specifically hard for even humans to catch when they are moving so quickly. So that combination compounds over time. So that is why, like, it's always, the governance, these policies are always like very necessary, essential across any industry.
Yeah. Okay. So just kind of digging a little bit deeper into that security risk, right? One of the interesting aspects of what the research found is that the risk is highest where the stakes are highest, right? We we have on average the AI generated code containing 15 to 18% more vulnerabilities, And those vulnerabilities, of course, are well, they tend to be more subtle. They're less likely to be caught by automated checks. So they also end up being deployed into production where they're going to become a much bigger problem, not only in terms of risk, but in terms of the cost to fix them. Because when they're found, even if they're not exploited or lead to a breach, if they're found in production, it's still a lot more expensive to fix it and kind of respin the environment. And the interesting thing that we found in the data is that regulated industries, which of course have the most to lose, that's why they're regulated, they also have the worst exposure. In the healthcare industry, for example, they have 6.5 vulnerabilities per 10,000 lines of code with AI. And before AI, that number was only 5.2. In the insurance industry, before it was 4.9, now it's 5.8. These aren't abstract numbers. In healthcare, for example, a vulnerability in production code is basically just a HIPAA incident waiting to happen. And if we focus a little bit more on banking and finance, say, we can see that the cautious approach where they have below average adoption and one of the lowest acceptance rates, that's paying off with an 11% interest in vulnerabilities compared to 18% across all industries. But of course, the problem is that's still a net increase in security risk. And when you look across some of the other dimensions of risk in the report, they're also realizing productivity and cost savings, which are well below average. And they're facing increased risk from code duplication, from bottlenecks in the processes and pipelines, and in the developer experience. Before I move on to story 4, why don't we do another quick survey, Yusra?
Are you guys able
Do
to
we have?
see?
No, I do not see a survey.
Oh, okay. How about now?
Yes, great, thanks. So in this survey, let's see how confident you are in your ability to detect the security impact of AI. Are you very confident, somewhat confident? Um, really, I guess this is looking more at how many gaps do you think you have in your process?
Okay, I'll give it a couple more seconds. Thanks everyone who's voted so far. And we'll end that poll. And these are the results.
Okay, interesting. So we're kind of halfway, or kind of basically mixed here between somewhat confident and not very confident, which I suppose is not too surprising. I don't think too many people have the extensive security scanning and a lot of confidence in their ability, just because security processes tend to be strained even with manual code development.
I'd be curious to hear, John, is anyone on the very end of the spectrum in any way? Feel free to put that in the chat if you're very confident or not confident at all. Would be curious if there's any people on those sides of the range.
Okay, yeah, be great to hear that feedback. Cool. So while we do that, I'll move on to story 4. And the good news is that AI tools are paying back quickly. ROI, of course, is being realized quickly, as we'll see on the next slide. It's just a few months. But ROI is always going to depend on how well we're actually using the tools that are available to us, right? Are we actually using them, first of all, or are they sitting unused? But also, how do we know what their impact is going to be? How do we make sure that the ROI that we're seeing quickly is going to be durable, that's going to last over time? Um, and those are things that most organizations aren't really measuring in order to know whether they're doing well or not. So, yeah, I'll get into the numbers here. On average, we're seeing, basically a 3-month payback period, and that's genuinely fast. But then look at the license utilization column. We have manufacturing at 60%, healthcare at 72. These organizations are paying for tools that 30 to 40% of their team isn't even using. So that's leaving some value on the table right there, right? They've invested in these tools, but they aren't being used by a significant portion of their user base. And of the teams that are actually using AI, a lot of them are focused on autocomplete type applications of AI coding assistance, right? Inside the IDE, the AI can help the developers basically write the code faster. When they start typing in what they want the code to do, the AI can help complete that and generate code that's going to solve the problem that they're trying to solve. But the problem with those autocomplete, as we'll see in another story, which will be coming up next, is that autocomplete users tend to see marginal returns. There's only so much that you can do when the scope of the AI is limited to a specific file or even a specific function within that file. Teams that are using AI in a broader context, right, including things like design, refactoring, test generation, they're the ones that are saving a lot more time, roughly 3 workdays per ticket. Um, so I guess looking at manufacturing, right, with the lowest utilization rate, it's not surprising that manufacturing is lagging in their break-even time, as well as in their annual savings. But at the same time, their productivity gains actually exceed all of the regulated industries, and the other metrics are essentially average for them. So if they wanted to increase their ROI, it's a pretty straightforward process of increasing utilization. Kind of the gotcha there is they need to be sure that they're carefully monitoring their delivery and their DevX outcomes to ensure that the delivery processes are going to be able to handle that increased volume generated by the increased use of AI. And that's kind of a consistent story across, well, I guess it's kind of the story that this report is telling. And here, moving on to story 5. I already alluded to this in the last slide. And really what this boils down to is that tool choice, while it may seem like a developer issue, is actually a governance decision. Most teams are still thinking about GitHub Copilot and AI coding assistant tools, autocomplete style tooling. Those are the most mature ones in the market, but the market's already moving on to tools like Claude Code and agentic workflows. And with agents, the governance burden, it just doesn't scale linearly from autocomplete style AI assistance. It really takes a big jump as you increase that. And what the data shows is that basically the market is stratified into 3 distinct layers. We have the autocomplete style coding assistants, things like GitHub Copilot that work in an IDE. They have a limited exposure to information. Typically, they can see the file that you're editing in the IDE. They may also be able to see some of the other files that are available through the IDE, but their exposure is generally, focused on a particular source code file. You have in the second layer, IDE centric. They're it's kind of hybrid, right? I mean, some of them are autocomplete, some of them are taking agentic approaches, and that second tier is basically expanding the reach of those tools. You have workflows that are not limited to specific files. Maybe they can see into the source code repository. They can see other files in there. They can, maybe even modify some of the rules within the repository. And the third tier are the kind of fully agentic tools like Claude Code, which they're not limited to files or even to specific repos. They actually are executables that run on the application or that run on the developer workstation, and they have exposure to essentially the entire network of the enterprise, whatever the developers have access to. And so the kind of the risk profile of these three tiers is extremely different. Where on the complete side of the spectrum, you have very limited exposure. You can modify files, perhaps. You might be able to, to change some code or inject some malicious code, but there's a pretty good chance that your testing and your scanning and the various other processes that are happening in the outer loop are going to catch a lot of that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, over in the agentic side, these are applications that are running on your developer workstations. They have access to essentially everything the developers have. They're often trained to, or configured to know what your API keys are and your commit tokens and all of these things. They have an extremely large blast radius, and it's very important for enterprises that are adopting these agentic tools to have enterprise-wide governance controls, audit trails, policy enforcement. They really need to make sure that they understand what these tools are doing, and that they have some guardrails to constrain the damage that they can do if they were to be exposed. Um, okay, so those are the kind of five stories that are revealed in the data. Yusra, why don't we do one last survey here before I summarize what all of this means, and then we can talk about what to do about what the findings say. So this last quiz, we're looking at, what's your biggest barrier to getting more value from the AI tools that you're using right now? Is it a measurement problem? You don't understand how the AI tools are driving business outcomes? Are they the review bottlenecks that we've been talking about, right? The outer loop not being able to keep up with the AI-driven inner loop. Are they security and compliance concerns, right? Do you worry that you don't have the right guardrails to really keep AI tools on track? Are you limited by adoption? Do you find that your developers don't trust what the tools are doing, and so they aren't using them? Or is it executive buy-in? You just don't have kind of the support to ensure that the tools are being brought in, and being able to convince leadership that you're seeing the ROI on those investments.
And these are the results from our last poll. Thanks everyone for voting.
Okay. Yeah, and that's probably what we would expect, right? I mean, we know that a lot of times the metrics that are being tracked aren't these systems weren't designed for the risks that are introduced by AI. And so a lot of the measurement just isn't there. There are a lot of visibility gaps that are preventing people from being able to understand the impact AI is having on their business and the value that they're getting from it. So yeah, I'm just going to quickly summarize kind of what those five stories really reveal in basically plain terms, right? We have the first thing is that adoption has peaked. Usage is a given. It's basically AI is essentially ubiquitous. Really, it's the governance that matters. Everybody's using it, so how do we ensure that it stays within its lane? The second is that inner loop speed is outpacing the outer loop capacity. We've seen it in the data, and it's not just our data, right? I mean, you see it across the industry as well in other reports and findings. And that's creating bottlenecks like that 4.6 times review to, PR review time wait. The third is that productivity gains are real, but they're uneven across industries and even across companies. Regulated industries in particular are absorbing most of the gains um, that are being driven on the development side in those compliance gates in the outer loop. Fourth, the quality is improving slightly, but security is getting worse. And really, the story there is that you need to be looking at the right metrics in order to understand what the real impact of AI is going to be. Um, you know, a, Consistently across industries, across organizations, across teams, we're seeing that 15 to 18% more vulnerabilities are coming through that AI generated code. The fifth is that ROI is fast, but it's fragile. You can get it the key is making sure that you can translate that into durable business value. Whether you have a problem with 21% of your licenses being unused, you also have to worry about that hidden rework with the duplicated code and whatnot, which is going to erode those returns over time. The sixth is that tool choice shapes the risk surface, right? Your agentic tools are going to require enterprise-wide governance, whereas you might be able to get by with improved PR review processes and testing for those autocomplete style tools. And seventh, the measurement gaps are the biggest barrier. What you really need is end-to-end visibility because that's what's separating the high performers from the average and the laggards. So now that we understand kind of what the problems are, right, what should we be doing about them? How do we take those findings and translate them into action? Um, you know, Probably the first thing I can do is tell you to read the report because it has a lot more detail. It goes into more detail over the recommendations. We just don't have time to really get into that in detail here. Um, so be sure to get the report and read through it. It's not that long. Um, Probably well, I think I have time to dig into probably three, maybe four of these, and then we'll move on to the Q&A session because I do want to make sure we have a chance to answer questions that folks have. Um, First thing, you really need to shift that accountability from adoption to outcomes. Simply looking at adoption is going to tell you that you're using AI and it's working great. It's improving, time to PR. It's really improving the development of code and the throughput on the development side of the life cycle. But you need to start focusing on the outcomes because that's where you see if those improvements on the development side are actually translating into business outcomes on the delivery side. Are those improvements being absorbed in the outer loop, or are they actually translating into delivered value? The second one probably is really collapsing those review and validation bottlenecks. We know that they're there, right? A lot of those outer loop processes are still manual. And what you really need to focus on is automating those manual processes where you can. Try to invest in building automated guardrails that can scan and enforce policy and do these other processes automatically as early in the process as you can, um, and try to build systems that are going to be able to run faster than the humans can. Ideally, that can run as fast as the AI does, because AI really is generating that code and increasing the volume of code that needs to work through those pipelines dramatically. The third is, treat security as a scaling constraint, not a checkpoint. You don't want a manual gate that's going to impede progress of your code through the delivery process. You need to establish those automated security controls, especially for AI generated code, because we know it has a higher density of vulnerabilities in it. And if you find that your security tooling just can't scale with the volume of code that's coming out of the AI, then consider slowing the expansion of your AI, because the worst thing you can do is to continue increasing AI, knowing that your security guardrails are not effectively controlling it, and that's basically just a recipe for delivering vulnerabilities directly into production, which are going to become a huge issue. If they don't lead to a breach, they're going to become a huge source of security debt, which is going to be very expensive to manage. Some of the other ones here, reframe ROI as capital efficiency, not as license payback. Protect your reviewers and your institutional knowledge. The you need to align your speed targets with your industry's risk tolerance. Startups are very different from any of the regulated industries, really. And probably the last thing is prepare for agentic AI now. We know it's coming. The value it delivers is dramatically higher than some of the other forms of AI assistance. And so it's going to be adopted. You need to be ready for it. Prepare for it now, not later. And with that, we can wrap it up a bit. Like I said, get a copy of the report, review it. It has all the juicy details and the context about, all of these recommendations as well as the problems. Um, and at the end of the day, the enterprises that are going to win in 2026 are the ones that are able to build the durable, predictable velocity and outcomes, not the ones that are generating the most code. So, Aruna, do you have any closing remarks that you want to share? And if not, Yusra, we can pass it on to audience questions.
Closing remarks, yes, just start if for those who have not started measuring their AI impact, start measuring it now and to try to try to find the soft spot, try to find where exactly the bottlenecks are happening and see how you can bring in governance to using your AI core assistant tools.
Alrighty.
Great.
And with that, we can get into some questions. One that we got in our Q&A bubble is one of the slides suggests both very low and very high acceptance rates as red flags. What does a healthy acceptance rate actually look like in practice, and how do you get there without creating a culture of second guessing the tools?
Okay. Well, I mean, I probably one of the things I would say is you want to find a good balance, right? You need to make sure that you're not rubber stamping everything that AI is suggesting, and at the same time, you do want to accept some of the suggestions in the sense that that's an indication that your tool is doing a good job, that it's recommending good code. So you need to find that balance. In a lot of cases, we see that organizations in that 40 to 50, maybe a little bit higher range tend to be pretty well balanced. But at the end of the day, it's not about the numbers. It's about understanding how that acceptance rate influences the business outcomes, right? Are you releasing more vulnerabilities into production? What does your bug escape rate look like? What does your failure rate look like? Just taking that big picture view across the life cycle is just as important as looking at just the acceptance rate.
Alrighty. One more we got in the chat is you mentioned a 4.6 times review wait time, and we've seen elsewhere that AI adoption amplifies process friction. Do you have a recommendation for a team like ours that need to understand whether to fix the review process before expanding AI usage or address the process during expansion?
Okay, I would take that up. So I would probably recommend first establishing the baseline, understanding where you stand right now, right? Before even starting to use AI, where do you stand right now? How is your review processes and what is the time that it takes in order to, for the entire life cycle, I would say, not just the review process, but the entire development life cycle. How much time does it take on across each and every stages? And then decide which AI tool to leverage. And yes, AI tool does amplify the process friction. Of course, it does, but it depends on where, how, who uses it and how they use it, and also having a baseline to measure where you were at and before using AI, and after that, how have you improved? It definitely adds a lot of value. And you can definitely use AI to fix the process as you expand.
Okay. And we can end with this question. Is there a version of AI assisted development that actually helps regulated industries? I know we did that industry spotlight. Or is the outer loop just fundamentally too slow in those environments for AI to drive real delivery improvements?
Okay. Yeah, I can chime in here. I mean, in those regulated industries, right, the outer loop is genuinely slower. We don't want to say that it's not. And that's not going to go away, and it shouldn't, right? There's a reason that it's slower there. It's because they have a lot more risk to manage. But there's also a meaningful difference between an outer loop that's slow because it's thorough and one that's slow because it's overwhelmed. What the data shows is that regulated industries are getting hit by the second problem. AI is increasing that code volume, which is increasing the number of findings at every gate, which then creates a backlog that wasn't there before. The answer isn't to remove those gates, it's to front load that governance so that code is arriving at the gates already validated against those standards that would otherwise stop it. That way, by embedding that security analysis and those compliance checks earlier in the workflow before the code reaches the pipeline, you're able to close that gap. The When the code enters the pipeline, the same gates are there. You're still validating the security and compliance and the various other things that you want to enforce in those pipelines. But the problems have already been addressed, so it all works smoothly through there, and the pipelines don't become a bottleneck. The healthcare and finance teams that have done this see their outer loop slow down less than the teams that are still catching everything at the gate. And basically, the gates become faster when there's less to catch because the problems were already fixed earlier in the process.
Okay, and with that, is anything Aruna, John, to end before I close out based on those questions or just based on our conversation today generally?
I mean, I would just remind folks that, probably the undercurrent to everything that we said here is that measurement is the key to solving a lot of these problems, right? You need to understand not only how AI is improving your delivery efforts, but also how it's impacting the business, how it's impacting your customers, your risk profile. And so just having that complete visibility throughout the entire life cycle from the time that you're creating code all the way through to how much code is staying in production is very important.
Definitely, yep. Okay. And with that, that wraps up today's session. Thank you all for joining, and thank you to our speakers, of course. Wanted to tease that the next webinar in our series will be all about security, so keep an eye out from that via email from Opsera. We'll be sharing the recording to registrants shortly after the event, so you can reference in the future. Share with your colleagues who are not able to join, and let us know what you'd like to see from us in the future when it comes to topics, themes, etc. Thanks again all for joining, and we hope to see your names and faces at upcoming Opsera events. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.